Hello, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 3 of the ESG Experience, the podcast about all things ESG and beyond. Whether you're an ESG expert or just dipping your toes into the ESG universe, this podcast is for you. Together, we'll navigate the alphabet soup of ESG, share strategies, and discuss industry news and trends. I'm Helee Lev.
And I'm Ryan Nelson. As the leaders of Conservice's ESG department, we value the importance of telling the real ESG story. Today, we are joined by Zach Wade, VP of Data Science at LightBox. We're going to discuss automatic building energy modeling. So very cool topic, automatic building energy modeling, or AutoBEM for short.
Are you sure it's not AutoBEM? You clarified that with the powers that be, the experts on the podcast?
I've known about AutoBEM for hours now. So, days.
Perfect. All right, so Zach, we're excited to have you. Just introduce you to our audience. So Zach is the Vice President of Data Science at LightBox. He works on projects including utilization of data science to expand LightBox's position as a leader in estimating the impact of climate change on commercial real estate. In addition, he leads the technology innovation, such as leveraging natural language processing to use unstructured commercial real estate data pulled from PDFs and other documents, creating models on GPS data to help increase real estate understanding beyond the typical and sometimes incomplete property sources. You'll have to unpack that a bit for us in layman's terms, which is what we plan to do, but an exciting project. And just a bit about Zach's background: a Master's of Science in Economics and Management from the London School of Economics with distinction. Good for you. I'm sure your parents were quite proud, including your award for the best dissertation. Several research positions, including at the Paul Milstein Center for Real Estate at Columbia University, as well as Deutsche Asset and Wealth Management and BuildFax. And in his spare time, co-founded a real estate data startup acquired by Vista Equity Partners. You've been quite busy.
Yeah, nice work, Zach.
Yeah.
Yep, it's been a lot of work over the past few years.
And yet you still find time to ski in Breckenridge, your hometown.
I do, yeah. That's the goal. Optimize the skiing when I can.
Do you live right next to the slopes? Is it easy access, or?
I live fairly close. It's probably like a 20-minute walk or something like that. And yeah, fairly close to a Nordic center as well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Nice.
Crushing life. Zach Wade. Happy to have you.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Well, good. Yeah, no, really happy to have you and really excited to unpack this. One question I'll pose to both of you that I learned in my research for the discussion today. It was a little astonishing to me. Zach, you maybe know because you're right in there, but I'll start with you, Helee. How many buildings do you believe there are in the United States?
Well, since I can see the answer on your script, I want to say what I might have said
what
had I
would you have
not
said?
been able to see, but it's very, I probably would have said 108.5 million.
No, you wouldn't. So you would have said like you would have said like 500,000.
There's no way to know.
Zach, what do you know how many buildings there are?
I would say probably around 160 million. So we detect them using satellite imagery and various other means at LightBox. So across the country, our data set is around 160 million, but that's including some smaller structures, not necessarily occupied structures.
Got it. According to the I think it was the Department of Energy, we got 129 million.
I was so close.
So yeah, right in the middle of what you two are talking about. Do you know how many buildings roughly in Canada?
In Canada? I do not know in Canada. Nope.
Oh, the answer is 7. There's 7 buildings in Canada. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. I love Canada. I know you went to school there as well, right? I don't know if you covered that one, but yeah, British Columbia, great. Okay, so I'll let you take the next one.
Yeah, please do. So I read the long-winded intro, but from my understanding, you guys are essentially building energy models for every single building in the United States. So maybe tell us a bit more about that initiative. What is AutoBEM and why is it exciting, other than to think that there's a digital twin of every single building out there and that you're spearheading this initiative?
That's going to take 200 years, right? Like, how can you do that?
It's a really exciting project for us. So probably about a year and a half ago, we partnered with Oak Ridge National Lab, which is one of the Department of Energy labs. And they have access to some pretty powerful supercomputers. Oak Ridge itself has I believe right now they're number one on the supercomputer ranking list in the world. So they have access to some pretty serious compute power. And basically, the Department of Energy is invested in creating what's called Energy Plus, which is a physics-based simulation framework for modeling the energy efficiency and emissions of buildings. They've invested a ton of money in that over the past decade. And then a couple scientists at Oak Ridge we work with, Josh New and Brett Bass, basically created a method for bringing in climate change data. So, models that have the stamp of approval from the International Panel on or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and downscale that so it's more geographically precise, and then intersect that with this physics-based building energy simulation framework, and then essentially grab data from LightBox. So at LightBox, we have information on pretty much every property in the United States, including physical and financial attributes. So things like how large it is, what type of property it is, is it industrial or is it an office, multifamily, those types of things. And then we have some deeper attribution on materials to some extent. So all that data gets plugged into this physics-based simulator, and we essentially come up with an estimate of what that building would emit, also given the climate that it's in, and then the climate that it will be in into the future out to the year 2100. So yeah, a ton of compute time to pull that off, but as a part of this agreement we have with the Department of Energy and Oak Ridge National Lab, we got access to that supercomputer.
And maybe I would ask the obvious, but what's the end game? Since you have all this information, you can predict this out to the year 2100. What are you going to do? What does the DOE or anyone intend to do with it?
Yeah, so the DOE is generally interested in understanding things like, given the current grid and energy supply that we have in a given area, and you plot that against the expected future demand, even holding things like population constant, but just looking at the change in demand due to a temperature increase, will the grid be able to handle that? If not, what infrastructure investments will be necessary? So that's a really big one from a Department of Energy perspective. And then from, at LightBox, we're also, we're generally interested in solving any geospatially relevant problems or real estate relevant problems, because our customers are, there's a wide variety of them, from big tech companies to investors and large lenders on commercial loans and environmental due diligence professionals. And all those different stakeholders also generally care about the future of the assets that they own or analyze. And then there's also the regulatory side. So places like the SEC and the Federal Reserve are all coming out with guidance on how assets should be viewed from a climate change exposure perspective. And this data set will be really helpful in being able to essentially understand from a real estate perspective certain risks that may arise in the future. This particular data set helps from a greenhouse gas emission estimation perspective, because it's anticipated that there will be certain regulations around scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And this really helps identify at the property level what those emissions are at scale if you don't have access to like a utility bill, which you would only have if you're the owner of that individual structure.
Yeah, that's very cool. Sounds like very powerful information for the challenges that we all face in the coming years and decades. So very exciting. You have access to that computer, those supercomputers, and that you're participating. I'll tell you, over the last 15 years, we've been involved in building energy models for our customers, right? So they hand us the architectural diagrams and they tell us the R value of the envelope, and we go around and measure windows, and we plug in how many people are in there and what the space is for and how many computers and all of those kind of things. Oh, and we get all of the utility bills like you talked about. So we've built models that way. And, I don't know, we've probably done hundreds of them over the years, and you're trying to do it for 129 million buildings, and you don't have, or 160, and you don't have those utility bills. So can you just give us a
Right.
little more? I mean, I'm obsessed with like scale and how to actually use big data to do incredible things. Like you're using public data, satellites, making a lot of assumptions, AI. Like, what are all of the? Give us a little more insight in how you
Yeah.
possibly do that many energy models.
Yeah, for sure. So first I'll start with, we don't have data on like the R value of the insulation of every building in the country, or like the HVAC model of every
Right.
that sits on top of every building in the country, or things like that. So there are certainly a lot of assumptions that go into it, and the scientists at Oak Ridge do a lot of interesting work in being able to identify some features like window to wall ratio. You measuring windows automatically. So that is one very compute intensive component that hasn't been done nationwide, but it's been done in a handful of metros that I can kind of dig into first. So with that, street view imagery is a really powerful source for this. So, Google created that data set, and there are other providers of street level imagery as well. And computer vision can be used to essentially basically you can run a classification algorithm on an image that you know is a building and classify the pixels in it as either a window or some sort of facade material like brick or whatever it happens to be. And with that, you can then calculate the surface area of those two surfaces and come up with an estimate of the window to wall ratio. So that's one method for scaling that particular measurement. Mm-hmm. Things like the R value of insulation or HVAC, that one is not really those two aren't really remote sensing achievable problems. So for this model, those are parameters that are sort of left out. I mentioned the Energy Plus model that the Department of Energy built, physics-based simulator, that can actually accept all the attributes you talked about, like insulation R values, window to wall ratio, the exact model of the HVAC system, which would obviously make the model of the building considerably better. But to at least, because we approached this from trying to achieve it at scale rather than individual property, we're okay losing a little bit of the precision to gain the breadth of the data that we're getting. So for things like that, basically there was real utility data that was used to essentially benchmark the model and test its accuracy. So from the Chattanooga, Tennessee utility was one of the contributory sources for that. It's a area near Oak Ridge, which is why. And then the other concept we use is this concept of property archetypes. So I mentioned that at LightBox we have data on what a structure is. So is it a heavy industrial facility or an office, and how big it is, and those types of things. So with some set of real energy consumption data, we can then, basically what we do is we make assumptions that properties of a given type are effectively similar in their energy emission profile. And we model that out to that extent. So it will be like if you were actually to grab the utility for an individual building, utility data, and look at it and then compare to the modeled results, they're certainly going to be different, but they should be relatively accurate for at least understanding future trends.
Yeah, that's what I was actually going to ask, is just about the level of precision, because I do remember, to Ryan's point, we do these energy models and we do have a lot of inputs, and we're doing them for individual buildings for a significant fee at a time. And it was amazing to me, they were always still off, right? Like, so if you took the bills in the years after to do the measurement verification and compare, I was like, how is it that far off? You had all these experts working on it. They're paid a nice fee using these, technology platforms. So I have to imagine with even less inputs, the precision's off, but to your point, that still helps on that scale, for the DOE to make decisions. So I would ask then, how did the DOE in years past make decisions prior to having access to the supercomputer? How are they able to actually pre-plan and know where the demand would be? Because this sounds like something new and cutting edge. How they do it the last 3 decades?
Yeah. I mean, I'm actually not incredibly familiar with DOE processes. I'm more on like the real estate and property side of things. But I mean, I think there's certainly an information gap in the past, because even the Department of Energy, at least to my knowledge, and the lab that I work with, doesn't have access to nationwide utility data at the building level. There are open data sets on like aggregate consumption at like the county level and things like that get contributed for current demand, but in terms of forecasting it for the property level, this is a new capability for them, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, I could envision, with enough data that you're able to get in some testing, that the precision could get, I might suggest, as good as a traditional model. I might say that, having access to 100 million buildings worth, and then honing that in a little bit, you might not even need to actually get the R value anymore because of the other components that you have. I don't know. That's a theory I might put out there.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to track, over time in areas where maybe we're able to get individual building utility data and benchmark this. Another thing I would say is that when you're forecasting energy consumption way out, like out to the year 2100, there's so many other
the margin of error,
variables at play. Yeah, so
macro level margin of
Yeah.
error and all. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's extremely effective whether or not you hone in on this thing, but this is maybe the thing that is going to be your bigger issue anyway. So
yeah, exactly. So that's, in terms of like a quantifying the problem perspective, I think making these assumptions is reasonable. But if you really care about the very specific kilowatt hours of consumption of a building, it's not going to be as reliable as sort of what you guys said, digging into the architectural diagrams and exact R values and things like that.
It's a different use case, right? Like why you would need
Yeah.
to do that versus what you guys are doing. And what's the timeline for a project like this? How long have you guys been working on this? And when will you say, like, put a bow on it and be like, it's done? Or is it just an ever evolving initiative?
Yeah. I mean, so the first version of it, we're very close. Our goal is to have the data set integrated in at LightBox within the first quarter of 2023. And at what that means is, so LightBox, we have a data set, like I said, of every property with unique IDs, and you can attach all kinds of different data sets to that. So like if you want to know the flood risk of a property or internet connectivity, all kinds of different things, we'll have that attached so our customers can consume it. By Q1 of next year is our target. The project itself took, our partnership started with Oak Ridge about 1.5 years ago, and the scientists at Oak Ridge have been working on it for a couple years prior to us getting involved as well. And then in terms of updates, we have a long list of ways to continue improving this and modifying it over time. It is pretty expensive. Like it does certainly rely on funding, like DOE funding to pull it off, given the supercomputer time. So there's a little bit of, I guess, call it grant writing or to create that partnership and continue getting allocation from them for the supercomputer time for projects like this. But, really it's the climate change models continually get updated. So, we would like to keep rerunning it as those climate models get updated. The building stock is always growing and changing. So, we'll need to update it for that. And then, those are really the two main pieces, and then expanding for as many climate scenarios as possible. Those are really the big pieces we hope to keep updating.
And how do you expect, so I understand like how the DOE might use it, which is one use case. How do you expect, so say you run a scenario and you uncover like a true disaster in a certain area and you can predict it to a certain level of accuracy, and like how is it, do you feel obligated to then disseminate the message to the folks that are living there or building businesses there, like, or things like that? I mean, you're going to have this information, right? Like, and then you have this power that comes with the information, or like, what are you going to do? Like, what are your moral obligations to disseminate said information?
Is that the
Yeah.
Spider-Man situation or whatever you call that? Great power comes great responsibility.
Something like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we have thought about that, and actually, as part of this project, we the aggregate form of the data is going to be open source, so anybody can actually consume it at a certain geographic level. Like the property data that LightBox has can't be open sourced, but at some like a summary level, we're certainly going to be putting out summary reports. We already have a published paper on it that's public as well, looking at Maricopa County in Arizona, which was just sort of an initial case study. But we're going to do similar things for, like, in an automated way for the rest of the country, and those will be disseminated. Yeah, so that'll be
Studies where you're going to be like, citizens of Miami, wake up! You're going to be underwater. Stop.
Yeah.
Like,
No, they're going to say,
you say the study's
here's the
published.
data.
Yeah.
Well, here's the data. You figure out, what you need to do about it, which is fair. You can't.
But
can't
that's
do
the
everything.
moral obligation. Like, are you supposed to try and save these people, or are you just the scientist doing the science?
I mean, I don't have the tools to save anybody, but I have the tools to put the information out there at least, and
That's fair.
we don't intend to hold it too close to our vests. Well, at an aggregate level, if we identify any interesting stories, we're certainly going to be pushing that out there so people can be aware of it.
What happened in Arizona? What's the case study? What's the story?
The story there's effectively that, I mean, unsurprisingly, it's getting hotter over time, and the demand on the energy infrastructure is increasing. Off the top of my head, I think it's around like 13%, 13 to 14% in total emissions increased out by the year 2100 there. So a considerable amount. Not as, we have looked at Miami, we haven't published anything on it yet. Other areas of the country are certainly more concerning than Maricopa County was.
You mentioned that the building stock, of course, is kind of changing. I figure like one new building out of a huge data set probably isn't that meaningful either, but that you're keeping track of that. In general, do you have any opinion or point of view? Is the building stock getting better? Are we seeing better performing buildings as far as use per DUI or any of these things?
Yeah, I mean, certainly a strong parameter in the model is the year built, and that's a very strong predictor of energy efficiency in this AutoBEM model, with more recent buildings certainly being more efficient. So that's absolutely a trend we see.
Okay, yeah, and I'm hoping that we see improvement in older buildings as well. I mean, that's part of where we're contributing, one building or one portfolio at a time. We've got a huge data set. We should maybe talk about something we might do together, but we've got probably the largest set of residential information with real bill data across the
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so just given our customer base, so there could be some learnings we could share with each other there. So what else is going on at LightBox? And don't hesitate to share kind of your journey on how you got there. I see you've been kind of a data scientist all your career, it seems, and maybe did you get there by acquisition, or how did this come together?
In a way, yeah. So not by acquisition, no, but I met the founders of LightBox when I was at my prior company, and sort of had a realization that we looked at the commercial real estate industry in general very similarly, and the geospatial data industry very similarly. So I jumped at the opportunity to join LightBox just because we have a lot of resources for creating new interesting data sets, bringing together a bunch of interesting data that exists out there to solve open problems, particularly in the commercial real estate sphere, but any geospatial problem in general. So we get to focus on a lot of different areas. Another interesting segment, which might cover the social side of this podcast, is broadband deployment. And I don't know if you guys have tracked that at all, but a couple of years ago, the FCC basically came out with a request to create a nationwide fabric of every location, and we happen to have that fabric. So we're working with state governments predominantly at the moment to help them identify every structure in their state, what it is. So is it like a residence or business? Do they have internet or not? What speed internet do they have? So then those states can then go apply to the federal government to get funding to connect locations that have subpar performance or no internet at all. So that's a really interesting problem that we get same data set actually that we're using for the greenhouse gas emissions problem, but instead of forecasting energy, we're trying to figure out that what's called the digital divide in terms of broadband access.
Yeah, that's incredible. I appreciate you connecting that to the social component, and that's awesome work that you're doing.
I remember, like the practical application of it. So during the pandemic, when students had to unexpectedly go remote, they were talking again about like the gaps. You already have underprivileged students, and then school goes online. Well, you take for granted, do you even have a computer at home? Do you have reliable internet at home? So now you're putting an even bigger gap in folks that were already underprivileged. Aside from the fact that they probably may or may not have, one working parent who's also trying to take care of them, who's also trying to, but that was a big problem, was that not everybody could just go online for school right away. And then you're talking about kids now that are another year behind because the other kids had grandparents that could help them do their work, or they had computers at home, or whatever it was. So there is definitely a social issue with regards to just access to the internet and information. So, and now we're all back at school, the way it should be. Thank the Lord heavens for that. That was a fun experiment that we could have another podcast about sometime if anyone wants to hear my opinions. So a question for you. So you keep talking about the year 2100. I know my plans through like next week. But I think about like the year 2100. Which are the areas, other than the obvious, like my mind goes to Miami, Houston, which are the top 10 troubled areas in our country in the year 2100 that might not exist or that are at serious risk?
Yeah, I think you can generally think about it geographically and in dividing the country up geographically. The more southern areas of the country, I don't have a top 10 ranking, but like the more southern areas of the country are going to get a lot hotter, and sort of the present climate, like the southern climate, is shifting north. So in some areas that currently don't have a huge air conditioning demand, for example, are in the future going to have a much larger air conditioning demand that'll probably require building retrofits for the building stock that survives until 2100, which that's a different question, I suppose. But I would say Miami, they're getting hit by. They're certainly, in my mind, one of the most exposed to climate change from all directions, unfortunately, because they have a huge flood issue. They also have a large temperature rise issue. But southern areas are really the most exposed. I think that's an obvious trend. And then more northern areas are just some are gonna, it's varied, but some areas are just going to be hotter longer, they increase higher temperatures for longer periods of time, or temperatures that didn't used to require air conditioning are now going to require it, things like that.
And are southern ones more susceptible than coastal? So like Miami's got, of course, both problems, but like you get the coastal ones from a standpoint of like sea level rising, from just the southern ones from a standpoint of like Arizona, just at some point 130 degrees is uninhabitable, which is happen faster for the model or otherwise.
Yeah. like I said, so Maricopa County is basically like the Phoenix area. The temperature rise wasn't as, for a 13% rise is obviously really significant and gonna impact that area a lot. I was sort of surprised that it wasn't higher, honestly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think the coast, from the temperature perspective, inland areas are certainly very affected. Like a lot of Texas. One interesting thing as well, though, is the Phoenix, with respect to the building stock, is in areas like Phoenix, you pretty much require AC there anyway, so there maybe isn't as much of a need to retrofit as much as upgrade the grid, probably. But
Yes.
areas that are going to require a ton of investment are those that maybe don't require those systems today, but will in the future. So then you'll need a grid and a building retrofit investment.
Yeah, as the climate, like you said, just what you see in the South now tends to move more to the north. I just watched some content about an ambitious farmer in Georgia who decided that it felt like it was time to grow oranges in Georgia and was capable, and that wasn't typical. And Florida owns oranges, and this person's like well up into Georgia somewhere, and he was 100% right. And he talked about feeling badly for those in the farmers in Florida who probably might not be able to even grow oranges for
Right.
too many more decades, sort of thing. So he actively said, when I was growing up, you could not grow oranges here, and now they're thriving. So very cool. And that's today. That's not even 2100. That's happening right now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting use case of this data set in general, is being able to try at least to forecast migration. So where are people going to want to live?
Yeah.
Given changes like that, where industry is going to have to move to, like that example. Those are really interesting problems that this data set can help put a framework around.
Yeah. Well, we already know. We talked about in the pre-call. Everybody are migrating to Colorado.
Yeah.
If the whole world
Fair
is
enough.
live
Yeah.
in Colorado.
Yep. As long as we can hold on to the snow. At some point, we're not going to get any snow, so then
Um,
people will leave here too. But
Well,
for now, we're sitting pretty.
Allure about I think the hiking is nice as well.
Well, I think we need the snow for the water.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It goes all the way
Yeah,
down.
and that's a whole other issue.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask one other thing, and then I know you want to move on to the game, but well, I don't know, just judging by where the script is in the scrolling.
Touché.
Yeah. I pick up on context clues. So you talked about like the different climate models that you want to update. As the climate model gets updated, you want to incorporate that into your model. Are they taking into account like any of the countermeasures? Like I know the real estate industry as a whole, I mean, our whole business is built around trying to reduce carbon and reduce energy, water waste within commercial real estate. Are the models like taking into account any of these countermeasures, or are the models just kind of predicting like the worst case scenario? They're like, oh, well, with some of these measures or some of like the, benchmarking or building performance ordinances that are coming into play that might actually have an effect? Or are these climate models just straight up disaster scenario, like assuming we kind of continue down the path we're on? Or is the mitigation factored in, I guess, what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, so the climate models are, the main ones are really just considering, I wouldn't say they're considering local policies. Like if New York comes out with a different policy than Austin, Texas or something, but they are generally considering different policy regimes overall that lead to a different carbon emission pathway. I wouldn't say they've gotten to like a very localized point yet, but in the model we are looking at county specific, usually it's county level, county specific grid energy mix. So like if you have two identical buildings in, call it identical climates, but one county has a mix of 50% solar and 50% coal or something, and then the other's 90% solar, that is taken into account in the model. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Good. I have two more questions. How many data scientists on your team, and are any of them unhappy with their job?
We have
Posting.
so we have
But don't
LightBox.
give
We
us
have
the bad ones. Give us the good ones.
the good ones. I don't know. We have across LightBox. We have a lot of data experts. In my what we call LightBox Labs is sort of the division that I work in at LightBox. We have like 5 of us, so it's pretty small.
Very cool. When Helee alluded to this game I want to play, and yes, I want to get to it because I want to spend a little more time on it than usual because I really want Zach's kind of AI and data science brain on some of this story here. So yes, very much appreciate what this project that you're working on and what you're doing at Lightbox and the problems that you are participating in. Even if you're not going to be the vigilante superhero to go out and save everyone yourself, you are participating, and we really appreciate that. So this is a very easy kind of binary game. You just need to guess. I'm going to give you the name of a company, and you just need to tell me if it's beans or beer. They either brew coffee or they brew beer. I'm telling you something. Do they brew coffee? Is it beans or beer? This one is called Kensington Brewing Company.
Beer, because it seems British.
That's right. It is British via Toronto.
Right.
But check this out. Kensington's brewers spent a year working with a Toronto-based machine learning company called Dessa to concoct a smooth style double dry hop IPA made with mango puree and lactose. But point was, they analyzed a huge amount of publicly available data, recipes, styles, food pairing, taste, did all this, and tweaked the knobs a little bit, but then this computer spit out 20 recipes for beer, saying here's 20 beers that would be very good. Now, they're actually then tasting these recipes and trying to change the model and figure out, but the idea would be that you could, so this took like a year and a half or something, but the idea would be if they get it, that you could make a new recipe, in a day or a second or something like that, that you would have high confidence is appealing to certain people. How do you feel about all that?
I mean, I would try the beer. It seems to me that it would be hard to collect the training data set to create that like predictor for whether a beer is going to be good or not. Because I mean, if you send out a massive survey, I suppose that would work. But that particular beer doesn't sound too appealing to me, so I don't think I feel great about it.
Maybe the AI messed up. Have you read? I think there are novels written by computers. I believe.
Oh yeah, there are. That's the thing.
Yeah, I don't know if any of them are any good. I should read one so I can better connect with this.
Yeah,
story.
this week actually there's a new model from OpenAI that came out called ChatGPT, which is the results of it are pretty astonishing in terms of like the accuracy of the language that it can write. Given a prompt, like you can ask it something and it'll respond with a very human-like response, which is pretty cool.
Like passing the old Turing test or whatever. Is that still a thing? That trying to could I read a novel and pick which one of the read two and pick which one was written by a computer?
Right. Yeah. I wouldn't say this would be a Turing complete. Wouldn't pass a full Turing test, but as a component of something that could, I would say it's getting pretty close.
It's too late in the podcast to do this whole bit, but I'll do it. So there's a science fiction book that kind of extrapolates this concept. There are 2 of them. One's The Circle, and then the sequel is called The Every. But so then it gets to so sure, you could have a computer write a better book and it will get the best reviews and be the New York Times bestseller and readers will love it. But then they started to go back and correct historical literature, improve upon it. They'd say, if this book had been written this way, or this classic historical book, if we changed these words or we made this character a little bit more like this. So then you get into the ethical matter of well, how much should you do? Sure, the computers could outplay the human authors, but should you go back and correct the historical fiction, or should you constantly just write exactly what people want to buy and what they'll enjoy to the most? That's what Netflix does too, to be honest. But those books are both really good. It just kind of gets you thinking. It extrapolates a lot of things. It extrapolates the concept of the Alexa and the Google Home, and if you really let that concept go just a little further, because none of it is so far-fetched where you're sitting there being like, this looks wild, these things could never happen. You're like, this scenario is wild, but given how we're doing things now, I could actually see how this could be a reality soon, and it's kind of terrifying. So shameless plug for both of those books, but it gets you thinking a lot. Like,
we've already seen that it was in the Terminator, like in its 70s or 80s. We know how this ends.
That's it.
The Terminator.
The Terminator.
Yeah.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I don't know. Do you have a favorite sci-fi
Destruction.
that talks about this, Zach?
Deus Ex Machina was a pretty good movie on the subject, I think. That one also ended in destruction. Yeah, I think they tend to do that.
I'll check that out.
I can't think of one that has like a positive ending, oddly. So
Shay, yes.
Yeah.
I think there was one, not Idiocracy, but there was one. But I'm obsessed now with I guess it's the multiverse concept or whatever. The fact that like we're probably just an iteration that some future computers, like we're in a game and some future computers designed us. So anyway, that's a whole nother
living
wormhole.
in a simulation now inside of the Oak Ridge supercomputer. We don't know it.
Yes, exactly. Yes, the simulation. That's what it is. Well, yes, thank you very much for sharing all that information with us and waxing about some of those topics. I really appreciate the macro approach and that you're solving for such big things. I've always been kind of obsessed with scale and thinking about it and you know how to do things like that. So it's really cool to hear your story. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you for the important work that you're doing and contributions to our future society. It's appreciated. On behalf of all of humanity, from me.
I don't think it's that significant, but yeah, I appreciate the time on this podcast. It was great speaking with you guys.
Likewise. All right, so this has been another episode of the ESG Experience podcast, and we appreciate our hundreds of thousands of listeners for tuning in each episode. If you did enjoy your time with us, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast directory. There is a new episode every month. We appreciate our loyal subscribers for continuing to support our podcast. And if you do want to continue the conversation between episodes, follow us on your favorite social media channel at #ESG Experience. And we'll catch you next time. Thank you.
Bye-bye.